Jude Currivan PhD is a cosmologist, futurist, planetary healer, member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, and previously one of the most senior businesswomen in the UK. She's a master's degree in physics from Oxford University and a doctorate in archaeology from the University of Reading. She's travelled extensively, she's worked with wisdom keepers from many traditions, and is a lifelong researcher into the nature of reality. She's the author of 6 books, including The Cosmic Hologram, is co-founder of Whole World View, which can be found at www.wholeworld-view.org. Jude joined me to talk about the second in her current trilogy of books about the nature of our reality and cosmic evolution. Despite the huge scale of that topic, the books are fundamentally about how we can individually and collectively activate a transformation through a new awareness of the undeniable unity in absolutely everything. In this conversation, we discuss how the seemingly chaotic times we're living through are an indication of the evolution of not only the species, but of consciousness itself in a universe that exists to evolve from simplicity to complexity, and to do so with ever greater individuated self and collective awareness. The book is called The Story of Gaia, the Big Breath and the Evolutionary Journey of Our Conscious Planet. I hope you enjoy our conversation, and please do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Here then is Jude Currivan. Your website is Whole World View is really coming along. That must get quite a lot of attention now that you're really plugging that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it does, and it's really great. And the endorsements for the book, of course, have been extraordinary. I mean, just incredible. I'm so grateful.
What a list.
I know, and they're not just saying this is a nice book.
I think the word masterpiece appears several times, doesn't it?
It appears to. It appears to.
Yeah.
And the book wrote me, Tim. You know that, and so I just feel incredibly honoured and grateful that Gaia sort of and the universe, gave me an opportunity to share the wonder that really is reality.
Yeah, that's actually a lovely place to start, because you have had some extraordinary experiences in the less than physical realm, shall we say, during your life, and so you've always had this very strong relationship to all aspects of Gaia and our reality that we find ourselves in as human beings. So this book, do you feel as though this is absolutely a natural progression of your work and your life so far?
It feels that, and of course the previous book, The Cosmic Hologram, was that too. About 20 odd years ago, I was given some guidance that I would write, because I've been writing a little while now, much to my surprise. I never set out to be a writer, but that I would write a trilogy that would hopefully serve some level of conscious evolution and transformation. And I was given the titles of the 3 books. And I was also guided that the first would be about understanding the nature of reality at a deeper level. And that was The Cosmic Hologram. The second would be about experiencing the nature of reality at this deeper level. And this is The Story of Gaia. And the third book would be about embodying the fundamental nature of wholeness of reality, and that's still to be written, or still to write me. So yes, and at the beginning of the book, I had trepidation. No, it wasn't trepidation so much. It was more about anticipation of what might flow through. And it's such a vast story that I could have got lost in it. I could have absolutely gone down so many different points of perspective. And as you know, reading it, it covers a broad range, and it's all evidential. This is the key thing, as The Cosmic Hologram was. It's the evidence for unified reality. But it was extraordinary, because literally the synchronicities of information coming forward, beautiful aspects. It was like seeing a jewel and being given every sort of facet of the jewel to see it in its wholeness, without really, I mean, you write a book, it's effortful in a sense, but it was also effortless, because I do feel the book wrote me in that regard. So I ended having a much even more profound respect, or wonder, love for Gaia and our whole universe.
What you just said really connected with me to the fact that we can very strongly connect to Gaia as the living being. I mean, because fundamentally that's what your book is about, isn't it? The unification of everything, really.
Pretty much. Well, absolutely. I mean, having set out this sort of underpinning and framing for a universe that exists and evolves as a conscious, therefore essentially living and sentient and unified entity, as I say, all the evidence for that in the cosmic hologram. With the story of Gaia, it is the story of our planetary home as a sentient being in a sentient universe. But it also goes back to the beginning of our universe, because right at the beginning, as our stories don't begin with us, you know, they go back as far as our memory, our awareness enables us to go. And of course, as cosmologists, we're now able to go back to the first moment of our universe, 13.8 billion years ago. But rather than beginning in that ancient origin as a big bang, which wasn't big and it wasn't a bang, we know it was minute. So that bit of the big is sort of funny. But the bang implies chaos. And in a sense, we've been taught a paradigm of almost a random, chaotic universe without meaning or innate purpose, and where consciousness somehow arises after a long series of accidents from a material brain. That now has been turned completely over to literally overturned, and we're now having the evidence that our universe began not as a big bang, but as the first moment of a conscious, ongoing big breath. So space expands and time flows. We have this incredible story now, a new narrative and a new unitive narrative of a universe that actually also embodies an evolutionary impulse to evolve from simplicity to ever greater level of complexity and individuation and interdependence and interbeingness. So this story is the story of us. I think, as my dear friend Irving Laszlo said, it's like perhaps the greatest story ever told, this time with a leading edge science that converges with universal wisdom teachings, to bring it into an invitation, as you say, an invitation to remember our profound relationship with our planetary home and the whole of reality.
It's the 3 words on the end, and the whole of reality. Well, 4 words, yes. I mean, it's massive, isn't it, in concept? Now, last time, you may remember that what I really like to do is to be able to bring these really big concepts down, so that obviously our subscribers to this channel, who are kind of, you know, they're peeking through this door of looking into what spirituality is, so looking into the other aspects of reality, their reality that they're experiencing. So you've described the book and you've described the work and the way that you feel that you have this you feel you do have this wonderful awareness of Gaia in all her in all its her or its what should I be saying?
I think when I first started to write the book, the title was Gaia, Her Story. And then as the book wrote me, I realized that it was far more of an integration of the universal principles of masculine and feminine and child. So I'm coming to it, but not as a sort of, non-personal. So I'm looking for an integral word here, and I haven't got it yet.
just as an aside, I'm reminded of the time when I described angelic beings in a conversation with Hamish, and he just categorically kind of interrupted and said, "They're sexless, Tim. It's not. Then there's
That's
no
it.
sex involved."
That's exactly it. And yet, you know, there are universal, and Hamish knew this very well, there are universal principles that can be ascribed as masculine, feminine, and child that aren't anthropomorphized. In other words, they're not just human, they're universal. So yes, it's not about sex and gender, but it is about those universal principles being integrated within the sentience that is Gaia.
Yeah, and actually that kind of answers where I was going with a very long and drawn out question, which was that how would you sort of highlight that how does this book apply to, you know, I've got a subscriber called Lawrence. Lawrence is a very intuitive and a switched on guy. He's a very spiritual guy, does various practices. How would Lawrence read this book, and what would that book do for him in where he is in that kind of conceptual journey? If I mean, I know it's not a self-help book, I really recognize that, but
Actually it is.
okay,
It's the probably least self-help, most self-help book insofar that I think actually healing our relationship with Gaia, actually becoming embodied Gaians, is perhaps the greatest healing journey we can take at this time. Because what this perception of a living, evolving, unified universe, which is of course multidimensional, is it actually invites us into a remembered wholeness of who we really are. It invites us to know that beyond the unity and diversity, because unity is not uniformity, it's radically diverse, beyond the unity and diversity, beyond the unity, even in inclusion, its unity is about belonging. We belong here. We belong here, we belong with and to our entire universe. So I would just invite Lawrence to feel that sense of his whole belonging, his intuitive, his rational mind, his experiential, his you know, what I call, you know, his superpower, our superpower of intuition, and much, much more is naturalized. Also, the communications with discarnate sentience is also naturalized and invited and welcomed. So whoever you are, however you are, whether you're incredibly you know, rational as the word is, which I don't think actually is. I think it's limiting a much wider perception. But if someone feels that, then even reading the book to appreciate the incredible journey that Gaia has undertaken to be able to birth beings such as us is wondrous. If, however, you're beginning or you're on a journey that is expanding your awareness, then it invites you into an even deeper adventure, an experiential perception of what that adventure, what that journey can guide you to. So whoever it is, and it is about, you know, thinking cosmic for sure, because we're part of a cosmos that is, we are part of it, we are part of its wholeness. Feeling global as Gaians now, I hope, but acting local. What does that mean in what's in front of us? What does that mean? You said about putting the washing on or feeding the dogs earlier on before we came on air. It's all of the. Because this is who we are. This is who our planetary home is. This is who and what our universe is.
I'm struck by the thought that I spent a lot of my time, I want to say thinking, but I should say feeling my way into the other dimensions, the non-incarnate dimensions. And a lot of that is about souls that have been present and have passed on and are in the afterlife, as we call it. Would you categorize those beings as part of the cosmos as well? Is that partly what you're saying?
Yes, I would. And I think our ancestors have an enormous amount to teach us, and we are able to open ourselves to their wisdom as well. But when I speak about our ancestors, I'm not just talking about our human ancestors. You know, I'm talking about our lineage goes back to the beginning of the universe. The hydrogen in the waters of our bodies, the hydrogen that pervades, you know, is so common within our biology, is as old as the universe itself. The rest of us is stardust, as we often say. But, you know, the waters of Gaia, the waters in us, which sort of reflect each other, half of that water is older than our solar system. I mean, some amazing realities to how this journey is unfolded. Before our solar system came into being, all of the what's called prebiotic building blocks, the complex carbon-based molecules, together with massive amounts of ice, were already there in interstellar dust clouds, just waiting for a nurturing planetary home to be able to then take that next stage of emergent complexity forward. We even have photographs of our ancestral womb, as it were, from the James Webb Telescope and from Hubble before that. So this is a majestic story, but at its heart is consciousness. We don't have consciousness and mind. We are, and the whole universe is mind and consciousness.
And it's an appropriate point to mention dear old Charles Darwin, when he published his particular... Oh, okay, there we go. Fantastic. When he published his particular well-known book, he caused quite a stir, and it's fair to say, I think, that a heck of a lot of science has been based on his principles or understandings of what was said by him in that book. How would you relate your book, because it is being compared to The Origin of Species in some respects? How would you kind of sort of equate your book with what Darwin was doing back then? And I know you have already touched on it slightly, and I'm thinking in that respect particularly about coincidence and chance, which was Darwin's big thing. You're really coming from completely the opposite end of the scale, saying, nah, that's not there. Let's move on from that.
I don't think he did write that, actually. He was, first of all, he was an incredible scientist in the true sense of the word, in that he observed, he experimented, and he followed where the evidence led. And that is vital. And so he was a great observationalist, he was a great experimenter, and he was a very, very clever man. The point is, all of that came together. And so what he did was he didn't speculate. He based what he came up with on those observations and those experiments. And as far as I'm aware, and point me to it if I'm wrong, he didn't talk about chance. He talked about ways in which biological organisms fitted better into their environment. And at the end of his life, instead of sort of sensing that the environment was somehow a passive, relationship, he realized, as Lamarck had also realized, that there was not just a coexistence, but a co-evolutionary partnership. And he was doing this back in the late 1850s, 1860s. And what is so remarkable about him, this was almost a century before the understanding of DNA and RNA and genetics. But what happened, I know, because I've done a lot of research on this, that his ideas of the survival of the fittest wasn't about conflict. It was about collaboration. And it was about collaboration to be the fittest to your environment. So the fittest match with a biological organism and the whole biosphere. Yeah. And that got moved into sort of social perspectives of competition and conflict. So when he said fittest, he didn't necessarily mean the strongest. He just meant the organism and the environment that fitted each other the best. He also talked about the variability. So he had some principles, but none of them per se As far as I'm aware from all my research, did he ever say these are random or these are accidental?
Okay.
He didn't know, so he didn't speculate. But the ones that followed him and the geneticists who are coming from a very material separatist paradigm brought in randomness, pushed consciousness absolutely out to the side, and also kept with the competition aspect and the interpretation of the survival of the fittest. So it seems to me, not Darwin, who I revere, but a lot of the folks that came afterwards took, I think, the whole perception of evolution and beyond biological evolution, because it's the evolution of an entire universe, to a point that I think now the evidence is completely overturning. And we're realizing now with all the evidence that biological evolution is not driven by random mutations. It is not driven by conflict per se. It is driven by innate collaboration at many different levels into not just an entire biosphere in Gaia and with Gaia, but what I call her Gaia sphere, because it involves also her rocks, her minerals, her waters, her atmosphere, as well as her biosphere as a completely interdependent whole.
So I mean, that's very interesting in itself, I have to say, because that's changed my perception of Darwin. And
I'm glad it has, because I think that, you know, when you look at what's being said in his name, you know, I feel it's it's not an appropriate interpretation of what he actually accomplished.
Right.
Because he talked about on the origin of species, but he was never able to, because he couldn't. We're talking 1860 here. He didn't know the mechanisms, you know, the deeper mechanisms for the origin of species. He understood how within a species or a particular type of biological organism could change to fit better with its environment as part of a biosphere. But what he wasn't aware of are times when in Gaia's history where there's been catastrophic changes within her entire Gaia-sphere and biosphere. And from that, in completely new forms of biology have emerged very quickly. So continued the arc from simplicity to ever greater levels of complexity. He knew nothing about that. So he couldn't realize just how rapidly major emergence, complete origin of species, and not just species, but whole phyla and taxa, you know, the larger realms of biological organisms, can rapidly evolve on a breakdown to breakthrough way of doing so.
Right. So this might be slightly off topic, and do say if it is, but where we are now, where we seem to be in our global situation, which seems to be, depending on who you refer to, in varying levels of catastrophic collapse. What's the message that you see, your unified world, cosmic view, the Gaian view, our position as part of Gaia and her consciousness? How do you see that progressing, given what you've just said about catastrophic collapse?
I don't know, because we're in a rapidly changing situation. We're in it. We're in a potentially breakdown and breakthrough birth canal. What I do feel and what I do see is that along with, you know, we've come to this point in my perspective because we've had a collective dis-ease, and that is a dis-ease of separation. We've forgotten that we're actually inseparable from each other, from Gaia, from the whole universe. And so if we have a worldview of separation, materialism separation, then the behaviors we have undertaken are natural outcomes of that. Why wouldn't we have behaved in the way that we've behaved, given that, you know, our collective worldview is one of fragmentation, separation? And yet we now have the evidence. We have the evidence for the first time ever at all scales of existence, across many, many, many different fields of research, that separation is an illusion. We now know that the appearance of our universe, its energy and matter and space and time, emerges from deeper levels of non-material causation, that it's imbued meaningfully by information. Information, consciousness expressed as information, is the fundamental stuff of reality. And the way our universe, from the very first moment of its journey, its evolutionary journey, came into being already genius, intelligent, able to evolve. So this story, this whole new narrative, we've told narratives from the get-go as a human species, haven't we? To offer ourselves meaning and purpose to who we are, to try and see who we are. You know, where did we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? But for a long while, those narratives have been, our narrative, our prevailing narrative, has been one of materialism, separation, fragmentation. It's brought us to this unsustainable point. At this point, this whole new and unitive narrative is an invitation to remember who we really are, to remember that we're inseparable, to remember that we're invited to consciously evolve, to be co-evolutionary partners with Gaia and with our entire universe. We stand on the bow wave of such incredible possibility, Tim. And this is the time where it's here and now, and this is the time for us to do so.
And that's the bow wave of incredible possibility for individual and collective development, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's about love. It's fundamentally about love. We, over the last period of time, apart from writing the Story of Gaia and much else, I was invited to help co-write a new and unitive narrative with some colleagues in a community I'm part of called the Evolutionary Leaders Circle. And we end that unitive narrative about this possibility for here and now. And I'm sure you know the philosopher Teilhard de Chardin. Well, you should.
Okay.
You should. Well, at the end of the First World War, Teilhard de Chardin and two colleagues were talking about something called a noosphere. You know, there was a planetary consciousness where humans were part of that moving forward. But he also said, and this is how we finish the unitive narrative text, he said, someday humans will harness the power of love. And when we do, we'll have discovered fire for the second time. And that someday I would suggest is here and now. And the unitive narrative and the story of Gaia and all that's coming forward, that's converging and integrating with universal wisdom teachings, offers us that opportunity, it seems to me.
Well, I mean, to say that strikes a chord, Jude, is an understatement. You've got me welling up, quite frankly. Yeah, because I know that's true. You know, I mean, there's no debating that. What a wonderful thing to hear.
Thank you, Tim.
No, thank you. That's okay. So the power of love. I just want to pull that thread a little bit because it's the fundamental. Let me just relate this to my experience, to where I am with many people that come to me and that I work with, and what I'm at the moment really facing is helping people actually completely shift their perception of all of the aspects that they have that are fearful.
Yeah.
You know, as a species, we have been driven by fear, or it would appear, for so long.
Yes,
And
let's come back to.
fundamentally, yeah. Well, I mean, talk on that if you can, please, because there's so much more for you to actually share in that respect about all of that aspect.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And for me, fear is a natural. I mean, if I see a tiger running at me, I'm going to be fearful, and then I'm not going to try and fight a tiger. I'll probably either freeze or I'll flight. But fear and if we look at the animal world, certainly to mammal level, there isn't fear, but there is this sort of fight flight syndrome. But whatever that, and the adrenaline surge that comes with that. But the point is, it's not chronic. It doesn't stay with an animal. So, for example, we've got studies of wildebeest on the African plains being stalked and chased by a predator, and as they run, their adrenaline levels shoot up. But when either one of them is cold or the predator falls back, they shake out that adrenaline. They shake it out. They don't hold it. As a human species, we've collectively, it seems to me, with our worldview of separation, fear is part of that. But we've sort of, that separation, that perceived separation sort of expanded and expanded, our fear has become more and more chronic. And the behaviors that derive from that fear and the traumas of those behaviors, with all of their inequalities, injustices, conflicts, have embodied chronic trauma within our species. So it seems to me now that part of absolutely fundamental, and this is why your work and so many other, healthcare, welfare. I was on a call with a whole raft of doctors last night with this conversation, is helping to relieve, to acknowledge that trauma, first of all, to acknowledge as well why it's there, why it's a natural part of the way we've seen the world, but now how we can shift our perspective, as you say, to progressively appreciate that we are not separate from each other or from Gaia. We're different, of course, thank goodness, but we're not separate. And there are many, many modalities and ways of doing that. But I think what this unitive narrative offers, it underpins and frames those efforts and offers authentic hope that says, this is the reality. Unity isn't an aspiration. It is our existential reality. It's real. And so, I would like to suggest also that both the cosmic hologram and the story of Gaia, they've got your back. They've got your back in helping to do this incredibly vital work, because we can't consciously evolve as a species without relieving and releasing the chronic nature of the trauma that's been embedded because of that misunderstood, misguided, limited worldview and perspective.
Beautifully said, of course. I would expect no less. Not to put pressure on you. Thank you so much. Again, last time when we spoke, you were we were talking about the cosmic hologram, and you were very clear that we need to be starting to think about going way beyond the quantum level into much smaller, and there's a whole raft of do we call that dimensions beneath the quantum level?
It's not so much dimensions, but it's a scale of existence, because we know that the appearance of our universe, just as high definition technologies are pixelated at tiny scales, Well, our universe's pixelation of universal information is at that minute that minute Planck scale, which is as small as to an atom is to the whole universe. So, the quantized level of energy matter is still huge compared to that level of pixelation. And yet the energy matter of our universe, which is informationally imbued, is beautifully, it's so perfect because, of course, it's vibrational. So again, this understanding gives us a deeper perspective of why healing modalities work when they are, vibrational or conscious, intentional, or at a remote level. It really holds the whole of both the deeper realities of our experience and the possibilities of our evolution in front of us.
Do you think it's possible to equate on a kind of, I suppose it's more symbolic and almost fractal in nature when we talk about repeating patterns at different scales and in different aspects of our reality? So just looking for a moment at quantum mechanics, we've got, I'm sure you will have heard of him, Carlo Rovelli, talking about relational quantum mechanics. So where his view of quantum mechanics saying that we should be looking at the relationships of all aspects to each other, which is, to me, it seemed exactly what you're saying in your book, is that symbolically you're talking about exactly the same process of.
Yeah, indeed. And I think what's really interesting and exciting, Tim, is it's not just Carlo, it's not just myself, it's not just men. There are many folks now, and it's the direction of travel that we're heading. Yeah. And what I've tried to do, as you know, in the Story of Gaia and in the cosmic hologram, is not just come from the perspective of cosmology or quantum physics, but show the evidence at every scale across numerous fields of research, and crucially at our everyday lived levels. This is the thing. This is not just a scientific revolution. This is a conscious revolution of our entire perspective of who we are and how we are in relationship on those fractal scales, with the whole world.
Yeah. And so coming back to our human perception on our day-to-day life of the fella or the lady standing there at the bus stop waiting for the buses that aren't coming or whatever, getting very frustrated. But there are patterns within that person's experience, let's say within that lady's experience standing at the bus stop, that actually are representative. They're symbolically repeated through. I mean, I'm not saying that. Where am I going with this? But this is
no idea.
But this is so important to me as a human being. There are patterns that show up in the universe that say symbolically they represent things. I haven't got a question here, Jude. I don't know what I'm saying. Let's move on. We like a little bit of chaos every now and again.
Absolutely.
So we've actually covered some really, as far as I'm concerned, some really beautiful points, and I'm going to be. I've only dipped into your manuscript. I'm going to read it fully, 100%. I have to say. Is there anything else that you particularly want to express to any of us?
I think, Tim, going back to your absolutely key point, what difference does this make to me as a lived human being? We've covered a lot of that, but the thing I always come back to, and the fundamental nature of love, our universe is a living, loving, evolving being, is the golden rule. People say, well, how can I do it? What can I do this? And it always comes back for me for the question of what would love do in everyday life. If you're standing at a bus stop, and you've got an umbrella and there's somebody else and it's raining and they don't have an umbrella, what would love do? You'd share the umbrella, and we can be very different from each other. Of course we can. And, you know, sometimes people behave in ways that aren't for the good of the whole. Absolutely, of course that. But that's their choices. But what is my choice in my lived experience every day? And for me, it's asking that question, what would love do? And it's also aspiring to live my life as a golden rule, to treat others as I would hope to be treated myself. And there's a platinum rule, which is how to treat others as you feel. You may not get it right, but you feel how they might want to be treated. So when you're balancing the golden and platinum rules and living our lives from that, for me, that's a choice all of us can make. Every single one of us can make.
That's absolutely fantastic, actually, because choice, the power of choice, it's the absolute, as you say, it is the fundamental position of us. That's what we do. We make choices all the time. Sometimes those are subconscious choices, and you know, and we know that we're running on subconscious programming a lot of the time, etc. But that doesn't mean to say that there isn't a purpose to that subconscious programming. But the fact is, choice, our choices, and the simple question is, what would love do in this situation?
Yeah,
that's so immensely powerful. That's wonderful. Jude, thank you so much for your time. If you ever want to come back on and say hello and talk some more about what you're doing, then just drop me a line. You'll always be welcome here.
Bless you.
So I don't want to ask you to put another date in your diary unless you really want to. So
I'd be delighted to. I guess I'm going to be pretty fully well.
You are.
But but I'd love to come up. There's a third book, I hope, and I would love to come back and share that with you. And anything you can do to sort of invite people to buy the book, because the more people read it, the more it can actually be a seed point for their own transformation, I think. And that's what it's about.
Absolutely.